A witch's altar is a witch's temple space, a place where the witch can venture to and anchor into, connect with, and be in a place that is not a place, at a time or during a time that is not a time. A witch's altar is a sacred temple in which to do a witch's work, and the altar itself is a manifestation of the divine Earth Mother. It is my opinion that an altar should be made of the most natural materials possible. This is not always possible, and both finance and circumstance, location, etc. can play a huge role in what type of surface you as a witch end up doing your witch's work upon. I am blessed to be able to work upon wood, and I am blessed to be able to work upon hewn pine. And this is something that is quite special in my region, as the hewn pine has an ancient life force, a medicine that is somewhat scarce now. And so there are still slivers and pieces of hewn pine here, there, and everywhere. And one such piece comprises my altar, my working table. Your altar can be of any size, any shape. I went through a phase in my early 20s where I absolutely adored round tables, round surfaces to which I would work my witch's work upon. And it was marvelous. I felt like it was intricately connected with the moon. It felt connected to the concept of sacred circle, and as such seemed to just hold this natural sacred space. And sometimes I still look at my rectangular table, as most are. Seldom do you find a square table, well, unless you're in some kind of a diner or restaurant. But I digress. But most tables are rectangular, and they have this angular, structured type of energy that I can find quite harsh. Nevertheless, I need this space, and I need to be able to create space. And so by having a somewhat symmetrical shape, I am able to jut it up against the wall like I do here, and it doesn't have to be present in the middle of the room. And I find that round tables can hold quite a bit of space within the room. But it doesn't really matter what the shape of your altar is. You don't even have to have an established surface. There were many times in my youth where having an altar just wasn't possible, nor was it practical. Whether it was because I was traveling, whether it was because I was sharing space with others, or space was limited, or whatever. There were just times where I would have everything in a little basket and go out on a patch of dirt and do my witch's thing. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. There are also witches out there who practice their craft completely without the use of an altar, preferring instead to wing it, to decide if they will in fact need a surface to work on, if they can work their magic in a unique way that does not require an established surface, and so on and so forth. So there are many types of witches and many types of approaches. But for me, in my personal practice, altars, shrines, surfaces to which I can adorn in my own manner as a true Taurus, I have to have an altar. I absolutely have to have an altar. I have to have that feeling of sacred space. I have to be able to come and sit at my altar to reset, to de-stress, to meditate, to journey, to read my cards, to do my art. I have to have that surface in which to work upon. It is, in fact, an extension of who I am as a witch. And that is exactly what an altar is. It is an extension of who you are as a practitioner of the craft. So please do keep this in mind when you begin to design your altar. And if you already have an altar, I urge you to strip it down, to pull back everything, to take everything off and just connect with the surface. Just connect with the surface, the physicality of the altar itself. Clean it if you must. Oil it if you must. Wipe down the legs. Wipe down the surface, and do so with sacred waters and sacred oils. I always give my altar surface a once over with moon water or river water that I have collected and blessed in particular ways, or that has been present within ritual. I then oil it with particular oils that are imbued with a type of energy that I am looking to bring into my space. I make these decisions very intentionally, and I work very mindfully as I'm doing this. The stability of my altar, the structure of my altar, and the health and well-being of my altar before I place anything else upon it is of vital importance to me. If there are any dead bugs on my altar, that for me is unacceptable. If there is too much buildup of dust and debris on my altar that was not placed there intentionally by myself, I might add, because I'm one that likes to scatter herbs, then I feel the need to reset that. I pay particular attention to the items that I place upon my altar, and I make sure that I keep them well. In well stead, some might say. I dust them, I will oil them, I will spritz them with things, with hydrosols, with sprays and what have you, that I believe hold a sacred energy. Everything that I do upon my altar is intentional, and what powers that intention is the magic that I am looking to draw into my space. An altar for me is the very anchor to a sacred space. By having a witch's altar in the room, that is your point of otherworldly magic. If you share space with other people and they don't have a problem with you placing your altar anywhere in your dwelling, in your environment, then they are lucky. They are truly, truly lucky. They are blessed to have that altar in that space. They are blessed to have the presence of a witch who does good work upon that altar. The altar will capture the magic that you create upon it. It will hold that magic as part of the narrative of that altar. A person who has a skill in psychometry and who can read energy and who can connect and who can sense will come upon items from time to time that are imbued with such sacred energy, and they can feel the level of good work that has been done. For any person who wanted to step into my space, who had such skills, I would allow them the opportunity to lay hands on my altar, something that I don't do quite often. And I would allow them to see exactly what it is that I do in this space and the level of care and attention that I take or place in the creation of my altar spaces. That is another thing. An altar is sacred. It is not something that people should finick with, and by people I mean anyone other than yourself. It is not a place for little hands to go grabbing, although that can sometimes be completely unavoidable. In which case, the type of altar that you would create, if that was your circumstance, would be one in keeping with the issues that you face within your circumstances. So for me, I have a completely separate dwelling in which I place my magical items, and that ensures that not too many little hands come and touch and play. But at times they come to visit me, and curiosity, of course, envelops the heart of a child, and they must look and they must touch, in which case I allow that to take place under supervised watch. i.e. I watch them like a fucking hawk. But I have to take that into consideration. And so if you are in an area where little hands just can't help themselves, then consider having a smaller altar space and placing it up high. Or consider having your goods in a basket, your witchy ephemera in a basket, and waiting for said children to go to sleep and then bring it out. But I find that it's quite beneficial and somewhat important to have an altar in the life of a child, particularly as a witch, because it teaches them to have respect for that altar. My children know at age 3 that that's mummy's sacred altar, not to touch. I don't find that they finick and play too much. If they want to come here and admire a crystal or pull a card, I have no problem with them doing so under my supervision, but it is something that I take into consideration And I want to be able to introduce sacred space in the form of an altar to my children. So inspired was my 8-year-old daughter some years ago that she wanted an altar of her very own. And so I gave her that altar. And I also drilled into her the importance of maintaining and caring for that altar space. And so it is something to take into consideration. The size of the altar that you have, the type of the altar that you have will all be dependent on your personal circumstances, the space that you have, the people that you may share that space with, the attitudes that you may have to take into consideration when creating an altar. And if you are someone who is largely in the broom closet, then perhaps having that sacred basket of goods that is tucked away for those moments where you can feel safe enough and confident enough to bring those items out and to create sacred space, whether it be on a surface or on the floor. Doesn't really matter how you go about doing it, but connecting with the idea of an altar is absolutely vital and will enhance that level of magic that you bring into your life each and every day. And once more, I would like to speak to those who are unable to work on a surface or who, for whatever reason, need to conceal their craft. Then treating a basket of witchy goods in the same manner in which you treat your altar is essential. I have a dedicated witch's basket. I also had previously a dedicated witch's basket before I moved to Tasmania. My basket now is different to my basket then. I actually left my basket on a beach filled with food and offerings to the gods before I came down. And so I severed that connection with that basket in grand sense, in which ways. And so I have another basket that I work with, but that basket is anointed, that basket has been smudged, that basket has been oiled, that basket has been treated with magical respect. And as such, if all you can do is work out of a basket, then that is no small task. That is no small opportunity. That is not a handicap in any way. You can make the most magical of witches' baskets. You can source your baskets ethically. You can add to that basket the very items that bring your witches' practice joy and that bring the magic and that bring the power. And by keeping them in that basket, like the altar, like the physical altar, absorbs the energy and the magic of those items in which you chose to place into them. And so your altar, your surface is of tremendous importance. Your baskets are of tremendous importance. And if you're lucky to be able to have both, like myself, I have a large altar, a small altar, and a witch's basket, then why the fuck not? Make the most of it. It is a privilege to be a witch in these times. And especially for myself, I don't live in an area that infringes upon my right to practice magic and to call myself a witch. I don't exist in that time, in that place. And so I make the most of that. And by doing so, I honor those witches that came before me that had to fight tooth and nail for the opportunities that we modern witches in Western culture have to this day. Not all of us are out of the woods as far as persecution and judgment. There are still many, many witches scattered around the world that exist in places where it's not 100% safe to be as open about your practice as others in different areas can be. It's a luxury really at the end of the day, and something to take into consideration. And so do place careful consideration into the construction of your altars and or witches' baskets. And I would love to hear exactly what it is that you work with right now. Do you have a altar? Do you have many altars? Do you have altars and shrines? And yes, there is a difference. A shrine is not a working surface. It is a place of honor and a place of dedication towards a god or an intention. An altar is a surface in which one can worship at and work upon. And so a working altar tends to describe the nature of the relationship between witch and her altar. So I will say working altar quite often for me and my altar because it is not a static space, it is a dynamic altar. I don't just worship at it, I don't just meditate on it. I read my cards, I craft my witch's wares upon it. And so this is my working altar. I have other altar/shrine type of places that it's just for admiration. It's just there to hold that space and to hold that energy and to honor and revere a particular theme, God, or place in my life. And so that is it for this week's exploration of the earth elements. We have just had a wonderful conversation about altars, baskets, shrines, working surfaces for the witch. I hope that you have enjoyed this. I hope that you will show me your homework via the Coven Facebook page, where I expect to see many a photo of bare altars, mine included. I promise that this is something that I will do. With all of that said and done, beautiful witches, thank you so much for sharing space with me today, and I look forward to talking to you next week about our next little something special, and that is what I choose to place on my altar, why I have adorned my altar in said manner. So this is Altar Part 1. You can look forward to Altar Part 2. Much love and many blessings.